Hello and welcome to Higher Ed Live. I am your host, Seth Odell. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm coming to you from the wonderful campus of Southern New Hampshire University here in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thank you guys for joining us. Today we're talking about project management in higher education. And well, it is a loaded topic. If you spend the next hour with us, we will save you that tenfold or more and a whole lot of headaches, stress, maybe even let you keep your hair. At least let your hair keep its color, because let's be honest, projects in higher ed, it's pretty stressful. The culture can weigh in, the deadlines, the timing, the budgets, the personalities, the committees. That's right. Let's count how many times that gets dropped today, the word committees. So we're going to talk all about that. We're going to help you guys get more efficient, learn ins and outs of getting things done. And like always, if you use Higher Ed Live hashtag, well, guess what? We'll take your questions and we'll get them answered. But first, let's thank our sponsors that bring this show to us each and every week. Without them, we couldn't be doing this. First thank you goes off to Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. That's right. You should check out their latest white paper, Social Media Measurement for Colleges and Universities, to learn what matters and what doesn't in social media. We sent that link out, and it's pretty cool. Definitely check it out if you can. Up next, you know them, it's Omni Update, the leading web content management system CMS provider for higher education. The company's web CMS, OU Campus, well, it's secure, it's scalable with great tools and features, deployment flexibility, and even an awesome user community. So why don't you see how CSU used Omni Update's OU Campus to unify 155 separate university websites. That's right, the link is out there, 155, brought it all together. OU Campus was the way they made it happen. And thank you to Scavenger. That's right, the Google-funded mobile game about going places, doing challenges, and even earning points. See how UCSD successfully piloted Scavenger within their library. We talk a lot about what Scavenger's doing in admissions each and every week with student affairs. Well, guess what? They're in the libraries too, and they're doing some cool stuff. That link's out there. You better check it out. And let's dive right in, guys. Each week we start with the weekly five stories from around the world of higher education that I think are interesting and worth reading, starring, noting, or telling yourself, you know what, I'm going to read that one this weekend. So sit back, because at the end of the day, I'm reading these so you don't necessarily have to. It's the weekly five. First story going on this week, higher ed sub-brands, 5 questions to test your strategy. I really enjoyed this article, actually. I didn't see it getting a whole lot of love on Twitter. I hope you guys can change that. The issue of sub-brands in higher ed is such a great one. A lot of times we focus so much on the biggest umbrella brand, which is your university or college, but there's so much going on beneath the surface, and that's the brands, whether it's of your sports teams, of your departments, of your varying schools, your programs. The reality is folks that have a relationship with your institution don't just love your institution as a whole, which a lot of them do, but they really have a strong relationship with a sub-brand underneath that. And I really think sub-branding in higher ed is going to be a huge issue moving forward, and a really good one. The reality is if you want a high return, you got to meet people where they are. Myself, just as an example, I love my communications program. I liked my alma mater, but it's not the same. If my institution's program can connect with me, that's powerful stuff. Sub-brands, guys, that's going to be a big thing coming up in 2012. Next up, Facebook passwords of applicants demanded by colleges and government agencies. This story was all over the internet this week, and it was all about how some colleges and other government agencies are requiring students to turn over their Facebook passwords. But here's the thing, I heard that and I cried foul. And why did I cry foul? I said because I looked and they never named the schools that were doing this. And I looked, this article was sent 600 different times, was picked up, and nowhere is an institution's name ever mentioned. So the reason I'm putting it out here is to say, do you know of institutions that actually is doing this? It's making students, in this case in the article they're saying athletic students, turn over their passwords to Facebook. The article says it's being done. The author never names a school, and I am just smelling something fishy. So I'm looking to you guys to see if you can tell me what's really going on. Next up, colleges shunning bottled water. It's actually a really cool story. You hear a lot about schools trying to go green, be more eco-friendly. There's just an interesting article going on about the battle right now for institutions that are trying to get rid of bottled water on campus and what the big bottled water industry is doing to push back. You guys know I'm an eco freak, love the environment, so I found this to be a really interesting article, and it's another example of what schools are trying to do and how things are a lot more complicated than you think when you try to go green. This article is really interesting. The aging college president. College presidents are getting older and less diverse. That's right, the numbers are in. They are older than ever and less diverse than ever. And the numbers aren't drastically changing, but they're changing. So it's just interesting to follow what's going on in higher ed leadership. I definitely found some of the stats in this article to be not crazy surprising, but I would definitely say disappointing. Now, this last article I'm really excited to share. I hope you guys can read it. It's all about that the federal government doesn't think that all students count. When the federal government tracks graduation rates, they are not tracking graduation rates the same way for students that go part-time or transfer. That's right. And guess what? The future of higher education is non-traditional. It's more and more people that are going part-time, taking 6 years to finish, or transferring from community college or other institutions to another to finish even faster. It's not going to be the same it has been for decades, and it's interesting to me, and this article does a great job of shedding light on it, that yet the federal government does not count all graduates equally. It's just an interesting article on an issue that I wasn't personally aware of, and I think is worth keeping an eye on. Definitely something to keep in mind. And lastly, the unsolicited shout out of the week, where we shout out any person, place, thing, or idea. Why? Because this is my show, and that's what I get to do. If you want to shout something out, just get your own show. Or you just got to use the Higher Ed Live hashtag. That's all you got to do too. We're always happy to share the love whenever we can. So who's getting the shout out this week? Well, it's going out to Chegg, and here's why. This is one of the best stories of the week, period, not just higher ed. Chegg awarded a struggling student $35,000 as a scholarship on The Ellen Show. This student was taking a 5-hour bus ride from Penn State up to New York City every weekend, and then he was tap dancing in the subway system to try and make money to pay for school. Ellen found out about it, I think it was through a YouTube video of him tap dancing on the subway, brought him on the show. Chegg joined the conversation and gave him a huge scholarship. I mean, come on, it's a feel-good piece. We're kind of reaching the end of the week, guys. You need it. So if you want the warm fuzzies, click the link we just sent out. So that's the unsolicited shout-out of the week. But let's dive in to the conversation at hand. We're talking about project management in higher education. We're talking about how you can get things done when it seems near impossible. And let's be honest, higher education has a whole lot of projects that take a whole lot of time, sometimes a lot of money, and a whole lot of emotion. So this show, I'm telling you guys, it's going to be the most valuable conversations we've probably ever had. And the reason for that is because it's going to save you time, save you heartache, maybe even a few tears. And all of that sounds pretty good. So without further ado, I want to bring on today's guest, who is Susan Evans from mStoner. She's a senior strategist, but relatively recently there. And before that, spent 20 plus years directing communications, marketing, and technology at the College of William and Mary. So please, Susan, welcome to Higher Ed Live.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited that you are going to be talking about this today. We had a conversation before, and as soon as you brought up this topic, I was shocked I hadn't thought to do it earlier. It's just such a valuable conversation piece for folks. It's going to save them time. It's something we all deal with all the time. And yep. I know it's not just our industry, but if you can help us today learn how to make things just move a little bit faster, be a little bit more innovative maybe, I mean, I think people are going to get a whole lot out of this talk today.
Great. Well, I'll do my best.
Awesome. So let's start right off just a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, just so folks know the context that you have in sharing your experiences with us today?
Sure. You mentioned a bit of it. I actually am a recent hire for mStoner. I've been working for mStoner for about 6 months, and it's been great. Just prior to that, you're right, I spent over 20 years working at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and most recently there as the Director of Creative Services. But prior to that, I spent about 12 years working for the CIO at William and Mary. I was the Director of Web Services, and so I would say that my real training ground for project management was when I was working in IT, because IT projects are notoriously bad in the way that they're managed, and so I learned a lot there. And before that, I worked in human resources, actually, at William & Mary. So I've got lots of experience there and had a chance in my new job to see lots of different campuses and experience a lot of different things.
And in talking about those different experiences, can you shed a little bit of light? Again, you said you've been on a few different places. What are some of the types of projects that you worked with in the past and also that you're tackling now as we continue the conversation?
Okay, sure. I've been really lucky. During my time at William & Mary, I think because I was in so many different offices, I got the opportunity to lead several different campus-wide initiatives. One of them was the website redesign that we did back in 2007. That was a large university design, and so that was a big effort. Another thing that I did that was a tremendous amount of fun was directing the communications for the mascot search for William & Mary that was done a few years ago. I also led a campus calendar implementation that was more of me as a champion for that project, and then some visual identity work at the end. So I have had a chance to run a lot of different kinds of projects, and it's interesting. I think we'll get into this as you start to ask me questions, but there are a couple of things that are the same about all those projects. And one is it takes a lot of internal communication. And the other thing is there's a lot of politics. And those sort of two things run through any project that I've ever been involved in.
And I think we're definitely going to see that today, that there's a lot of stuff that crosses projects, could even cross industries, stuff that's going to resonate with a lot of folks. So I just sent a question out onto Twitter. So I hope, guys, if you're watching, please let us know what you think. So the question, Susan, I'm going to pass to you, that's already out there on Twitter. I'll let you know what the responses are, is what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing projects in higher ed? And you're welcome to either just whip over a couple, or maybe we can just pick, what you think maybe the top one is, and we can start drilling down and getting into the nitty-gritty fun of this conversation.
Okay. I'm going to answer your question, but before I do, I'm going to say one thing, and that is, before I came to mStoner, I went to 59 different college campuses, and mainly that's because my husband's a faculty member, so I've lived in a lot of college towns. I've helped my kids find colleges. I've just visited a lot of campuses. So as I'm answering my questions and as I'm giving you examples, if you're at William & Mary and it sounds like I'm talking to you, I might not be, or talking about you. And if you're a current mStoner client, I am definitely not talking about you. So I just, that's just a long way of saying that because I've been around higher ed for a while, my examples and my anecdotes are from a number of different spots. So you asked about how the biggest projects in higher ed, or what the biggest challenges facing higher education projects. And I think there's a couple of things. One is higher ed's slow to change, and projects are about change. I mean, the way you define a project is a temporary activity. If it's an ongoing activity, it's not a project. It's operational. And so when you think about how colleges and universities operate, they're sort of set up to be contrary to the temporary, let's face it. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think in a lot of cases, we don't have executive sponsors in place for projects, and we don't always pick the right person to lead the effort.
So now I want to dive right in then and pull up one. Great one comes in from Patrick Powers, saying he thinks the biggest challenge for him that he's seeing is, or that on his thought is getting buy-in, not from all people, but from the right people. So can you talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on as far as getting buy-in? And I think Patrick has a really good point there, that it's not just like institutional-wide buy-in, but it's understanding who are the right people that really need to be invested in a project as it moves forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said for engaging as many people as you can engage on your campus. Now, you can spend too much time doing that, and you can do that at the expense of getting the work done. I understand that. But I do think we miss the idea that there might be something we would hear from somebody that would be good for us to hear. People have opinions and thoughts and suggestions and experiences, and sometimes those are good ones. And so I think we all roll our eyes and say, oh, we got to get feedback. But sometimes the feedback is really good for us to have, number one. So I would say that. The other thing is, all feedback is not equal. If you're going to do a project like this, you're not going to make everyone happy. If you've made everyone happy in your effort to lead a project, you're probably not doing a lot to change anything that's happening on your campus because everybody's happy. So I think getting the right feedback, I think Patrick is definitely correct about that. I think it involves figuring out early on what your project is trying to do, and that's why things like project charters, which are often skipped right over by people, but being able to articulate in a sentence what the purpose of what you're doing is helps you figure out who you need to listen to.
Now let me jump in then. So what is a project charter? If someone like, I don't know, not me or anything, is hearing that and going, what's that? Not that I don't know what that is at all.
Right.
But for anyone else that might be confused.
That might not, right. Now, I don't want anybody to think that they should sit in a room for 6 days and, write a mission statement and get it vetted by 100 people. But you ought to be able to, especially if you're the project manager, you ought to be able to articulate with a lot of clarity what it is you're trying to accomplish. And you ought to be able to do it in a couple of sentences. If it takes you a paragraph to explain what the purpose of your project is, chances are your scope's too big, or you haven't defined clearly enough what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, and that
so,
brings,
so I was just going to say a project charter is essentially just a statement. Mm-hmm. And, the few times that I've been asked to do the projects that I have that are kind of big university projects, and I was asked by, an executive level at the university campus, I went back to that person and I said, all right, thanks for the opportunity. I'm willing to do this. Here's what I think we're trying to accomplish. Here's the project charter that I wrote. Am I correct that this is what we're trying to do?
And the point you hit on, I just want to mention is Mike Petroff weighed in the same thing, saying scope is one of the biggest challenges. He thinks project scope is often too large in higher ed, and it must be nimble and lean, build, launch, iterate. Can you talk to me about a little bit more than about scope and about the fact that I do agree that I've definitely seen projects where people are definitely biting off more than they can chew?
Okay, well, it's about to happen. I'm about to use the committee word. The first time the committee gets together, what ends up happening is even if you have a project scope and maybe you've done a good job articulating it and maybe you've done a good job coming up with a charter, people come to that first meeting and essentially everybody comes with all their problems and they want your project to solve those problems because they're looking for any solution for the technology issue they have, the communication issue they have. So they're going to like glom on and try to get you to handle their problem, and it could be way outside the scope. So that's something you got to be aware of first of all. Scope means that somebody's the bad guy. Scope means that somebody says, you know what, that's a great idea, but that's not what this project is about. Scope means somebody says, hey, we really need to do that, but we've gone this long with an awful X, so we're going to go a few months longer with an awful X, and that'll be phase 2. And then, of course, my favorite is it's the web. It can change. We don't have to do all of this in phase 1. So
now, another really good one that came in was several people mentioned an issue of caution, which is this kind of falls back into the buy-in issue, but it's really important. What have you seen? And this is a point that there are times I found that I think people are using caution as an excuse to not innovate, and they're saying because there's always unknowns and there's always what ifs, and this could go this way. How do you navigate that if you're in a position where you're trying to move a project forward and there's maybe an individual or a group of individuals where they keep almost, it seems like people play out the worst case scenario. And it's like, well, if everything goes to crap, well then it went to crap and then we can't do it. But obviously in life, if you're going to take, you have to take risks. So how do you manage risks when it comes to these projects and help people understand that there's a healthy level to risks that can be good for an institution?
yeah, and if anybody from the creative services team at William & Mary is listening to this right now, they're going to recognize this statement. There's something I said all the time, and that was, if you're working on a project, you have to be able to deal with uncertainty. You have to be able to live with the idea that for X number of months, you're not sure exactly how it's going to turn out. You're taking a risk. You're diving in. Things could go wrong. Things could be great. And so, I mean, part of project management, I think, is understanding that you have to live with uncertainty, and that you can't be stressed out by that to the point that you're not able to take action. You are going to have people come to a meeting. You can call it a task force, you can call it a committee, you can call it whatever you want to call it. They're going to come to that meeting and they're going to talk about risk, and they're going to be cautious. And the reason they're going to be cautious is, number one, a lot of people hate change. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And so they're going to be resistant. Number two, change usually means work for somebody. So if it looks like work's coming their way, they're going to be cautious. And people are burned in higher ed by a lot of really bad projects. And so you end up getting a lot of, well, when we tried this back in the day, or when we tried this 2 months ago or 2 years ago, it didn't work. And what makes us think it's going to work now? You have to listen to people when they say those kinds of things, and you have to respect their opinion, but you have to talk back and say, hey, it's a new day. We're going to do this differently. And how can you help us, make it a better situation?
Now, another challenge that came through, someone was mentioning about divisions in institutions, whether it's between faculty and staff or other people, and that is definitely a problem, I think, especially when it gets to a committee and you have a division within a committee. So can we delve a little bit deeper and talk to me more about that idea of an executive sponsor, and how can you go into a committee and push things forward in a certain way? I mean, who do you look for as an advocate? What can you do, and how important is it to identify those person or persons in a position of authority that can sort of be as sort of a sponsor of your project and really kind of share a sense of ownership?
Yeah, and I guess, you could work with it a number of different ways, but my preference would be that your executive sponsor not be on your committee. My preference would be that it's somebody high enough in the organization that has sort of said to you, all right, I want you to run this effort and I'm supporting you. And I was lucky enough to have that happen a couple of different times. And I remember even going back to that individual and saying, all right, I'm going ahead now. You've given me the running room I need, but if I need to get in touch with you, I need to get in touch with you. So in other words, if I decide that I need you, are you there for me? And they say, yeah, sure, fine, that's great. So that's the first thing. I think it needs to be somebody who's high enough up in the organization that they're respected by the community. Now, you know how higher ed is. It doesn't really matter how high enough somebody is in the organization. Everybody can disagree with them because of just the nature of the academy. you have to pay attention to certain constituency groups. I think you have to pay attention to faculty and you have to pay attention to students. And I don't mean to imply that the other groups aren't as important, but I think that if you don't include faculty and you don't include students, you're going to pay now or you're going to pay later. So you either take the time that it involves to get those groups into your project, or you end up hearing from them later on at a point where it's a lot more disruptive.
Now, one other point I just want to mention before we move on and start talking about some tactics and strategies, which is going to be really exciting to get into, is I do find there's another issue that is maybe it's not just our industry, and I'll look to people that have worked outside of higher ed more extensively, but it does seem that there is not, at least in a lot of institutions that I've experienced, sort of a culture of people planning their own exit strategies. So like the reality is people leave jobs, but in higher ed it's almost like there isn't this plan. There's not a plan in place a lot of times. So that way I've seen projects that just stop dead in the water because someone left and there wasn't a succession plan basically in place. And is that an issue, do you find? I mean, do you find projects that there's a key person involved that if that person drops out or leaves the institution that projects can just essentially hit the skids entirely?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can happen. I guess my gut reaction to that question, though, is I wonder if the project was going to be going on too long. Not that people can't leave 6 months into an effort, but again, projects are meant to be short-term opportunities, and so that's one thing I would say. The other thing is, the project manager is really just one piece. You need a team of people in most cases to help with a project, and the best way, committees are usually really big. And the people on committees in higher ed don't usually expect to do any work. They expect to come to meetings, hear what you have to say, disagree with what you have to say, put up roadblocks, and occasionally say, oh, that's a good idea, let's go forward with that. But I think in addition to a project manager, you need a core team of people that are living and breathing what you're trying to accomplish. And if you have that, then if any one person leaves, you're in a better situation to kind of scramble a little bit at the beginning, but get things together and keep things moving.
So let's move that a little bit forward then and talk more about that issue with the team. Because one thing I found is there's a lot of times that projects move forward and yet people don't have defined roles. And that's always been surprising to me. I mean, you can have a team of people and you need a team of people, but how important is it to, at the beginning, define roles so people understand I am responsible for this piece of the pie, here's how I'm helping you, and have that conversation? Because it does seem that sometimes you have a project where there's 6 people that want to drive, and other times when nobody does. And both of those things can end really badly.
Yeah. And that's something that I'll tackle that in a couple of different ways. The first is you need one project manager. I've been in a couple of situations recently where clients have said to us, well, our project manager is A and B. And the response I usually give to them is, I don't care if you guys put your desks in the same room for the next year and work together, that's cool, but only one of you can be the project manager. I mean, these projects are complicated enough, and it's really difficult if you're trying to have 2 people make the kinds of decisions that the PM has to make on a daily basis. Doesn't mean that PM shouldn't be really consultative. Doesn't mean that PM shouldn't rely on other roles. But you need one individual who at the end of the day is accountable for getting things done. As far as roles on these projects, this is where things get complicated in higher ed, and I think your comment about the industry makes a difference too. In private industry, I've seen people pulled away from jobs for a year to work on a project, right? So somebody says to you, we need to do X in our company. You're the one to do it. We're stripping all the responsibilities you currently have, and we're giving you this new thing to do. That doesn't happen in higher ed. We all get to keep our day jobs at the same time that we are running a project. So it is really important to have a core team of people that know that their role is going to be supporting the effort. And it depends on the nature of the project. Sometimes there's a communications role. I mentioned the mascot committee. I didn't chair the mascot committee, but I directed the communications for that group. And you can have a technologist role. I mean, somebody sometimes at the end of the day has to make decisions about what we recommend technology-wise. I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to stop and just follow it. Make sure I'm answering your question.
No, you definitely know. I want to dive in a little bit deeper then too and talk about the role of a project manager. I bring this up for many reasons. I first off have to say, for those of you that know my beautiful and lovely wife, Jillian, that is what she does. That's been her specialty in higher ed, is doing project management on a variety of levels. So I know it more so indirectly from her experience. But it's also, I would assume, not the case for small institutions or even some large institutions that a lot of times the project manager obviously isn't officially a project manager. Is that right? I mean, is it sometimes where you go into a project and someone has to put a hat on and it says who's going to run this project? Because like in my first office in higher ed, there was no project manager, but there was 14 of us in the office. So if we had a project, people would be like the project lead, but it's not like they had necessarily in a day-to-day before that project would have experience. So I found that was interesting. That it was kind of like people were getting thrown in a little bit to the deep end that they're supposed to be a project manager, but to be fair, there are a lot of skills that go along with doing that, and it's kind of hard to learn that on the fly.
Right. Yeah. If you have no project manager, your project is gonna fail. And maybe you don't think it's going to, and maybe you've seen projects succeed where there was no project manager. But I would argue that that's because somebody took on the role as project manager, even though it wasn't given to them. So I think, the idea that you just run these things and nobody's accountable, that's where we do a lot of wheel spinning. And if no one is designating who the project manager is, I would question whether you not have the right executive sponsorship too. But you're right, in higher ed, project manager is a term that we kind of throw around really loosely. And it doesn't always mean the kind of thing that it should mean. And project management comes out of industry, comes out of, engineering actually. And, there's the projects are a lot different, certainly when you're building a submarine than when you're, creating a website. But I think that you need a particular type of person, and I'll not answer that because you haven't asked that question yet, what kind of person you need. But I do think that we throw the term around loosely, and somebody has to be responsible for the project, and it's a lot more than just keeping us all organized.
And well, let's talk about that then. Tell me a little bit about what makes a good project manager, again, whether that's their job title or this is something that they're doing for a project. What should you be looking for? What kind of skills do they need to be able to make this happen?
Yeah, something has stuck with me over the years. I mean, first of all, I think the best project managers are not necessarily people who are technologists. I think a lot of times they're people with people skills. So that I would say number one. The other thing that has kind of stuck with me, when we were beginning our search for a partner to work with at William & Mary when I was doing the web redesign there, one of the consultants that we talked to, I asked him about what kind of project manager do we need? What do we need on our side? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, you need a person who is high enough up in the organization that they have the credibility to run the effort. Because a project manager is going to run the effort but doesn't necessarily supervise the people that are working on the project. So he said you need somebody high enough up in the organization that they have the credibility and the respect of the campus, but they need to be low enough in the organization that they can roll up their sleeves and do the work of the project, because you don't need somebody who's just used to kind of directing things and not actually doing anything. So it's kind of an interesting combination.
It definitely is, and there's so many nuances to that. But definitely having the credibility is huge. That's one thing I found too. It's really difficult to ask someone to earn trust on the fly. And that you can be really deemed to fail too. And that's why a lot of times it's the people that have gotten trust from individuals that can get everyone in a room that says, yes, we all agree to a common goal a lot quicker because they believe in that person. And that's something you can't always put your finger on, but you know it when you have it.
No. And it's I've often laughed about it and thought, I mean, I don't think it's the reason that I led the web project at William & Mary because I'd been there a long time, but I definitely think it was one of the reasons I led the mascot communications at William & Mary, because I remember when I came home, my husband said, you agreed to do what? It's like the mascot, I can't believe you agreed to do that. It's all political. There's nothing to be gained by you being involved in that project. And I was like, it'll be fine, And I think because I had been there so long and I knew so many people and I was able to count on those relationships, and that's a big part of project management. It's a big part of being successful.
So now we're talking, you mentioned before that not all project managers have to be technologists, for instance. But one interesting thing to kind of shift that conversation too is that technology can play a really interesting role. So I'm going to shoot out a live poll right now on Twitter asking people that are watching, do you guys use a project management software? If so, what is it? And then while those answers are hopefully rolling in, Susan, can you talk about the role of project management softwares? I was in a conversation recently with someone who said they don't like using them. Definitely not, but they're involved in a lot of projects. And then we're currently implementing a new one in our office. It's been kind of something that's been very much prevalent in my life recently. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on just project management software in general, doing it, and if so, what's the best places to start looking?
Yeah, I started my time in IT at William & Mary teaching people how to manage projects. I was doing technical training at the time, and I was teaching them how to use Microsoft Project. And so I started there, and then I managed the William and Mary web redesign actually on a series of Excel spreadsheets. So somewhere in the middle lies the answer, I think. The advice I usually give people is that, yes, you need to have some sort of way that you are tracking your project. You need to know what tasks you have to accomplish, and you have to have an easy way to organize those and break those down and assign them to people. Sometimes that can be something like Basecamp. Sometimes it can be an Excel spreadsheet. Sometimes it might be Microsoft Project. The thing that I caution people about is, number one, you don't want to spend more time putting a task in the tool than it takes you to accomplish that task. So think really hard about how you're using these tools. And if you're spending hours and hours and hours writing up what you're going to do and ending up with no time to do it, that's probably not a good situation to be in. That said, most of these projects have a lot of teeny tiny little details that all add up to something big. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you've forgotten something large or haven't started something large in time because you're not tracking things. Just before I left William & Mary, we used a product called Fang Open Office, and we liked it a lot. It was kind of a combination between project management tool and communication tool, because yeah, you need to track deadlines, milestones, deliverables, but you also need to track who's doing what and what their progress is so far. So it's kind of a mix of tasks with people communication.
A lot of folks coming in on Twitter saying Basecamp is really popular. That's what we use here at SNHU currently as well. Now, one thing, this might sound too detailed, but I don't think it is. One thing that we just started doing through Basecamp, we're using a plugin called Clock, and we're tracking all of our time. And I know, obviously, in the private sector, that's something you got to seriously do when you're billing clients. In higher ed, I'll be honest, I'd never done time tracking before I came to SNHU, and I have already learned so much, because how can you make smarter decisions about how you're allocating your time if you don't actually know how much time certain parts of the project are taking? Are you having too many meetings? Are you having too many change orders because you're not having enough meetings? I mean, time tracking just seems to me to be such a valuable way to make more educated decisions.
Yeah, and again, none of these answers I'm giving you are a real silver bullet, but I can remember a time when I was putting together a project plan, and I happened to be using Microsoft Office, and I got to the end, and I figured out, I was so proud of myself. I knew exactly what we needed to do, when we needed to do it, and who needed to be involved. And of course, when I hit submit on Microsoft Project, it'll tell you right away that you don't have enough time to do that project. It'll tell you, okay, well, if you're going to hit that deadline, you need X number more resources, and I knew I didn't have those. So it can be frustrating sometimes to try to use systems like we're talking about. But I do think that if you are going to manage projects, you need to be able to estimate how long it takes to do work. And you also need to pad those estimates. The best project managers will go to the person who's going to be doing the work. So if I need to have somebody write a piece of code, I go to that programmer and I say, hey, I need this piece of code by mid-March. Can you do it? They say, oh, yeah. Then I pad 2 weeks. Don't tell them about the pad, though, because you don't want to be in a situation where you've missed a critical point on your path, and things come up. People can't always spend every minute working on something that they expect to be able to spend. So if you want to really make yourself honest, not make yourself honest, if you really want to give yourself a real sense of what you're doing every day at work, I challenge people in higher ed to spend the next 3 weeks tracking what they do in half-hour increments. I had to start doing that when I went to mStoner. It is a fascinating thing to do for yourself.
Yeah, it is. By the way, it is exhausting at first. It really is. But tell you what, this is it. It's official. I want to issue the challenge with you to everybody watching. If you're not yet, you can download free applications to do it, totally free, really easy to set up. Heck, you can do it on a piece of paper. My brother is a lawyer. He still tracks on a piece of paper, and then he adds it up every day. Just keeps a pad in his pocket. The reality is, I think it's really important, and I was shocked. For me, again, I do a lot of video work, as a lot of folks know. I had never honestly looked at the amount of time that each section of video production took, and that was really, really educational for me to understand a little more that I was spending so much time coordinating up front, and then here I wasn't doing as much, and here's where I have that window where I can get more done. And now, if someone comes to me and says, can you get this project done, and I know I'm free for the next 3 days, I can say no, because I know it's going to take 4.5, and I have this going on to the end of the week, and it just makes a lot of sense. So I like that challenge. That's being issued to everybody. So let me ask another question then. We're talking about time tracking management. What's your thoughts on budget? I mean, there's so many times in higher ed I've seen two things. One, a project that has no defined budget, so it's kind of this weird gray area. And then other times when you have a defined budget, but it's not necessarily reflective of what you need. So how do you even approach budgeting? Is this something that has to be done before you even take the first step?
In a lot of projects, that's true, that you have to get that budget sort of nailed down first. But, I found myself leading a lot of projects that didn't have a budget. The one example is the mascot search. We had no budget for that. And so I think a lot of times people end up not needing a budget because so much of the communication work that we do has no fixed costs on it. Now, I would say that when you're leading a project that requires a budget, that you're right, get that kind of nailed down up front so that you know what you're dealing with, get a commitment. I'm going to now become famous for telling people to pad budgets and pad time estimates, but you need to build in a contingency to a budget because, and I would say, somewhere between 10 and 20%, because something's going to come up that you didn't think you were going to need or didn't know you were going to need, or a great idea is going to come in that you want to accomplish, and sometimes that requires money, and you don't want to necessarily be in a situation where you have to go back to somebody and ask for additional funds. Mm-hmm. So I do think, building a contingency into the budget is a good idea. Tracking it carefully is a good idea. When I did this at William & Mary for the web redesign project, I tracked the budget carefully because I wanted to make sure there was money for buying pizza for the team and buying everybody sandwiches when I knew they were working late. So, you have to pay attention to those details.
And Mike Petroff said it in the Twitter stream. It's definitely a quote that's thrown around a lot by our SVP here at SNHU2, which is under promise, over deliver. Can't stress that enough too with some things. I think you have to manage expectations. I think manage expectations is so huge, whether it's time or budget or anything else, that, I don't know, there's a lot of times I found when I was earlier in my career that I would say, I can get this done by Friday. And I thought if everything goes well, I can. And then, if any little hiccup happened, I was up all night. I was doing everything I could. And it's just, I don't know, where do you balance that optimism of trying to inspire someone to say, I can deliver this or we can do this at a certain point, and also being realistic that life happens and it's probably very rare that a project goes smoothly without some sort of hiccup or bump in the road?
Yeah, I'm not sure I actually agree with the statement, under promise and over deliver. I think you can do that sometimes, but I don't think that should be your default way of operating. I think the project manager has a relationship with the people that are doing the work. And you need to go to a person and say, give me some sense of time. And if every time you ask for an estimate, you realize later on that person really could have done it in half the amount of time, but they didn't tell you that gets kind of irritating if you're the project manager. So, I think there needs to be some trust in the relationship so that the person that you ask gives you a good estimate. You pad it enough that you're taking into account that they're being perhaps overly zealous in their commitment. But I don't necessarily like the idea that people think they have to, under promise and over deliver.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I think it's a very interesting point. I appreciate that point of view very much. So I want to ask another very random question, which is just, what are some tips and tricks for getting things done in a situation when you're not sure you can? And I'm going to start off by just sharing one, which is a simple philosophy that I try, which is I found one of the fastest ways to get buy-in, for instance, is not trying to convince people of your opinion, but trying to convince people to want what you want. So show people why it's good for them. You're on this committee because this is how this is going to benefit the institution. And by benefiting the institution, it's going to benefit you. Is it important to I just feel like if you're looking for buy-in, I've found that it really helps when you help people understand what's in it for them. I hate to say that, but people are innately looking, what's in it for me? I'm busy. I have a lot of things to do. And if you can convince them that your investment's good for you, and here's why it's good for me, I think it's important. One thing I found, sometimes people say, this is really good for our division, and we need your division to help us. Well, that's not really inspiring this other division to say. It's saying, we need you to help us because this is going to be really great for us as a team, and here's why. What kind of advice like that might you have? Maybe a tip or trick or other suggestions, having been through the ringer as much as you have with kind of getting things done when those roadblocks pop up?
Yeah, and that's another thing I think we're not necessarily good at in higher ed, the collective good. We think about our individual school, our program, our unit, but we don't necessarily think about what's good for the institution. And I agree with you that what's in it for somebody is important. But I think the reason it's important for communication. Like the only way that I can really effectively communicate with you is to get your attention. And typically a good way to get your attention is to talk about something you care about. So that's one thing I would say. But I think when you're trying to convince someone about a project, an aspect of a project that you're working on, that may be your entree in. You know, your entree in might be, let me talk to you about this because I know you care about it and I'm trying to get your attention. But I think you ought to be able to talk about the collective good, and you ought to be able to talk about why you're trying to accomplish what you are, because I think there's a lot of turf that goes on in higher ed. And when I come to you with something, is your response going, oh, she's trying to get something out of me? Well, no, I'm not trying to get anything for me. I'm trying to get something for the institution. So I think if you sort of explain things in the way that you're talking about what you're trying to accomplish, and you're explaining why it's good for the college or university that you work for, that's a powerful thing. I'll stop there. Yeah.
No. I think that's really good advice. It definitely is. It's something I think that rings true for a lot of folks. So let me shift a little bit. Given your recent role, is there anything about dealing with outside organizations, vendors, companies, that's different in higher ed? It does seem that a lot of times that's an area where there's a disconnect for some institutions. Do you think that a project with an outside partner of any kind, do you look at those at all different than an internal project, or is it all the same? Would you approach those differently, or is there any advice in that world that you think is important for people to think about?
Yeah, and I've done both of those kinds of projects, and I know that I can remember feeling really disappointed sometimes when an external consultant or an external partner would come on campus and essentially say the things that I'd been saying for, a year, 2 years, 3 months, whatever it was. But I think what you need to focus on and you kind of touched on this a minute ago, when you're thinking about projects, is you don't have to be right, you just have to get what you want. And if what you want is an incredible new web presence and it takes an external partner to get people's attention, then that's okay. If what you want is a wonderful new mascot for your institution, then it doesn't really matter, why you got asked to be part of that effort. So the idea is to focus on what you're trying to accomplish and what you want to get out of something. I used to tell people, because I did a lot of references for a lot of different vendors that we worked for when I was at William & Mary, especially in IT, because there were lots of different external partners. And I used to tell people that when you're working with a consultant, nobody cares about your project more than you do. The on-campus person has to care the most, because it's your institution, it's your neck on the line, it's your set of tasks that you're trying to get done. And so even when you're working with an external partner, I think you have to manage your aspect of the partnership. You can't just throw all that project management to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good point. I want to ask you a tough question. Which is for
as opposed to what you've asked me so far.
These
right?
have all been softball. I've just been serving them up, just lobbing them over. Now we're getting down to it. Here's my question that I'm asking on behalf of all project managers out there: is how does a project manager hold someone accountable when they are higher than them on the org chart and they're not pulling their weight in a project? Because I have seen that's been the challenge for some project managers, that how can they hold someone accountable when they're not their supervisor? In fact, they're lower kind of on the totem pole than them. That seems to be kind of a big challenge for project managers out there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation. I have a couple things to say about that. One is the best project managers will ping you and you'll never know that you were pinged. So the job of a project manager in a lot of cases is to talk to people. And the reason you want to talk to them is not to say, hey, Seth, you told me you were going to do X, Y, and Z by Monday, and today's Tuesday, so I'm here to get it. That's not what you do. You walk in, you talk to Seth, you say, how you doing, how you going? Listen, I've been thinking about our project, and I've got this piece that I'm working on. And what does Seth do? Seth says, yeah, you know what? I got that thing I'm doing for you. I'm a day late, but I'm promising I'm going to have it to you tomorrow. So what the project manager needs to do is build a relationship with people, talk to the people he or she is counting on to do the work, and get the information they need to get in a way and I know it seems like, why should I have to do that? Why can't I just walk into Seth and say, hey, damn it, give me the thing you promised me? You just you can do it that way, but I don't think it's as effective. And the other thing I would say about that is accountability is a really interesting word. In my opinion, if you if you wait for people to disappoint you, they will. Okay, so if you give somebody an assignment and then you just wait and they don't do it, you can set yourself to be disappointed every time. And I think that's not the right way to operate. You're trying to get something accomplished. I know we're all adults, but people need to be prodded, and I don't see anything wrong with that.
I totally agree, and I love that you're talking about the way you communicate with people. I can't stress enough that I really think that sometimes projects can get knocked off the tracks literally by tone or the smallest things.
Yep.
I mean, one thing, we use Basecamp here. I've used project manager software, but it's so important to chat with people. And I found that, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify anything, but I found that allowing people to save face is the fastest way to retain their loyalty. That if you're calling someone out, especially in a meeting, and you're not letting them save face and saying, "Oh yeah, I owe that to you, I know it," you better really know you're making that decision, because that's a fast way to get someone who is no longer going to be invested in your success. And I found that just in general in work, that you have to allow people to be accountable and responsible, but let them save face. Allow them to say, "I'm getting that to you," and you just say, "That's okay. I know you're busy," and give them that little piece where they still feel like there's I don't know if it's trust or loyalty, but I've just found that people that don't allow folks to save face end up sailing the ship alone.
Well, and sometimes you're relying on somebody to do something for you that you can't get from anybody else. And so you've got a disincentive to ticking them off, because you need them to ultimately do what they're supposed to be doing, even if they're late. But you know what? I'm not sure I answered your question. I don't want to be accused of being a politician later. So you asked me, though, how you manage a project when people on the team are at a higher level than you organizationally. I think the way that you do that effectively is that you do a really good job as a project manager, that you're respectful to everybody on the committee, but that you treat everybody on the committee as equals. I know it's kind of a weird situation. I know it can be uncomfortable, but I don't think you want to set up a committee where you've got this hierarchy that's really obvious to people. And so I would recommend that you just do good work. Ask a lot of questions, and try to forget the fact that organizationally you're at different levels, and just think of yourselves as a core work team that's coming together around a central challenge. And if you focus on the work, I think the rest of that stuff takes care of itself.
I totally agree.
I recognize that it's uncomfortable. I've been in that situation myself a number of times, and in a couple of different situations, I think I was in that position because the institution was trying to point out that somebody wasn't doing the job they should be doing. And so sometimes it's a good thing.
Now, I want to ask you a question that I have up on screen right now from Patrick Powers, which is the other side of that coin, which is a great question, which is, how do you reel in those who want to be too involved in managing a project themselves? And I'm glad you mentioned that, because while a lot of times you have people that you're struggling with, there are times when people are just like desperate to share ownership at a point when maybe they shouldn't. And I have experienced that too. So how do you deal with people that are really excited and passionate, but to the point that they want to be in the driver's seat, and maybe that's not really the role they should be having?
Well, I think if that person, there's a couple of things. One is, if that person's your boss, there's a different set of answers than if that person is just somebody on the committee that's trying to get involved in stuff they don't need to be involved in. And I think you just have to carefully manage that with people, set up the agenda in a way where you can control that to a degree. Talk about process, talk about, I know we'd all like to be in a situation where we could sit around this table and talk about this for 16 hours, but instead, why don't we ask these two individuals who know the most about this topic to go off, come up with an idea, and then present it to the rest of us. And that gives people who want to be involved a chance to be involved, but they don't get to be involved in the nitty-gritty detail. They just need to be involved in suggestions that get made after some work has been done. I have been in situations where perhaps your boss wants to be too involved, and I've been really lucky. I've worked for a number of really great people, but I've also had to be really honest with them sometimes, and I've had to go and say, "Hey, you asked me to do this, and you need to back off and let me do it. I got it covered. I promise I'll come to you if I have any issues that you need to be involved in, and check with me on the side, but let me see if I can do this for myself. It's great professional development for me. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'll try to keep you involved if I need help.
Now, my last question that I'm going to toss out before we slowly begin to wrap up is, do you think there's ever a point when a project is too far off the tracks that it just can't be saved? I mean, I think anyone who's been around Hired for a while has probably experienced the project that gets killed, that it's just someone higher up gets tired of all these things and they kill it. Do you think that's fair, or do you think there's always a chance to resuscitate and bring back to life a floundering project and bring it back to its former glory?
I actually think that it would be better if more projects got killed. My experience is that projects kind of flounder and sort of become something no one talks about. They don't officially end, they don't continue, but they don't really get killed. They're just sort of out there. And I think that's worse for morale and worse for anybody who's worked on it than if a project just gets killed. But to answer your question, I suppose there are circumstances where things are far enough gone that it's not a good idea. I think that's true. I think that usually happens when, here's my opinion, it often happens when you haven't been broadly consultative at the beginning, and people feel like they're not being heard. And the more they feel like they're not being heard, they start making up stuff, because whatever you don't tell them, they fill in with. And then they start to get, even though they don't have any opinions, they want to be asked. And so you can get yourself into a situation where if the campus climate is just not right, you're not gonna be able to finish. So I suppose there are times when that happens.
Really good point about the projects that live on but don't really live.
Yeah.
There is a weird project purgatory in higher ed where it's like they sort of die, but they're not quite dead, and it just gets stuck. Very interesting point.
We used to call them stalled. We just, on our spreadsheet, we would just say, this is stalled. And, I used to contact clients and say, hey, and this was at William & Mary, not at mStoner, but I used to contact people and say, hey, just so you know, your project's stalled. Like we want to help you. We want to do this work, but we're not hearing from you. So you're on our stalled list. And it was very nice, very congenial, but that way they know you're not out there doing something.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Now, I want to throw one last question in from Lori before we start to wrap up too. She's asking, what can one person do themselves to manage their projects when they have no dedicated project manager? What can you do on your own? So do you have any tips or suggestions for folks that are sort of on their own, watching this show, that are essentially their own project manager for themselves? What are some tips for that?
Well, at the end of the day, right, everybody manages themselves, right? We hope, in the best of circumstances. I think I'm a big believer in to-do lists. And you have to write them down, type them up, put them in the software of your choice. I don't care. Not many people can run around and just have it in their head. The people that do that usually forget a bunch of stuff, or they don't make the right thing the priority. So having a to-do list, and actually I spend some time pretty much at the end of each day or at the very, very beginning of the next day looking at my to-do list and saying, all right, what are the things I absolutely have to do today? I'm not going to stress myself out about the 25 things that are still on my list that I haven't gotten to. I'll get to those eventually. They will eventually make themselves known and bubble up to the top. But I think the idea of looking at a list and saying, all right, what do I absolutely have to get done today? And then doing that first. And that means, let me just go write this one email. Because when that happens, a half hour later, you come back to that list because you've done all these things that are not on the list.
I totally agree. It's a really good question, Flora, by the way. It's a little bit of a shift on the conversation today, but I like that. Just for me, for what I do, I use Google Docs for, I don't know, this is a side note, this is a whole can of worms, probably don't need to get into, but managing like different roles. I have SNHU, but I also have Higher Ed Live. I run a side company. I'm going to school. I have my own life. So I use a Google Doc, but what I love is every day I come in, especially to SNHU, and I write on paper what I have to do. And I write a list, and I try to organize it by priority. So it's more or less like this morning I need to do these things. And I have a larger list in our project management software, and I have more online that's like got everything. But I have like today I have to do. And then every day I tear off the previous days and I rewrite it as punishment for you didn't do this yesterday, so you need to manually rewrite it again.
Right.
It's a little excessive, but I need that push sometimes to be like, you've rewritten that twice already, Seth, because you didn't do it.
I know.
It's
And
punishing.
sometimes I'll actually stop myself from writing it and actually do it real quick, because it might be one of those that if I would just give it 2 minutes, it would be done and I wouldn't have to transfer it to the next day.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that goes back to the email thing. I mean, so often I've just found, it's those little things that totally get into, that get in and mess up a project or mess up your flow. And that's why, too, I'd say that people I would really say, try new things. One thing I've really been pushing is production windows, where it's saying, I need 4 hours a few times a week where it's no meetings, no email, nothing. I'm shutting everything off. I'm putting on my headphones. I'm doing this work. And no, you cannot find me. You cannot find me in this window. I've also tried, weirdly, I've tried working split shifts where you work 4 a.m. to more like noon or 1 to try and get in when I know people aren't going to be around. I have these quiet times. I'm sure everyone's different. So I think within a project scope, people can try to find what works for them. And I'm sure that, lifestyle is a big issue, but folks can find, what makes you more efficient. That's something with projects is finding ways, I'm sure, to be as efficient as possible.
Right. Back to Lori's comment too. One idea, if you don't have a dedicated project manager working on something that you're working on, is to go to the person who's the sponsor of that project and just say, hey, this week I thought I would do X, Y, and Z. Does that sound right to you? Does that sound like the right level of priority? Does that sound like the right thing to be focusing on? So anything that you can do to engage people that are waiting for whatever it is you're working on to help you and make those decisions, I think that's another way to manage your time.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So this pretty much takes us to the end of the conversation today. This has been a really fun hour. I really hope for the folks of you watching that you will get more than an hour back and be inspired to try these different approaches to make things happen, get more done, get shit done in higher ed. So, Susan, any last thoughts or advice for folks watching the show today?
Yeah, one last thought that I have is, I thought of this when I was preparing for the show yesterday. The academic calendar to me is relevant. Every year we know what's going to happen. We know students are going to come. We know when fall break is. We know when spring break is. We know when commencement is. And there's a lot to the academic calendar that affects projects, because people are sometimes around and they're sometimes not, or they're sometimes busy and they're sometimes not as busy. So I think whenever you can look at your project timetables and kind of sync the academic calendar up with that, you can that usually helps. So that's another thought I have. I'm surprised, one thing, Seth, that we didn't talk a lot about committees and how to get a lot out of a committee.
Yeah.
So
let's dive into this for a minute. We can always stretch the show a little bit. What can you do? Give me the synopsis. Let's take that big conversation and let's push it down.
All right, I'm going to look at my notes real quick.
Yeah.
So committees, what I thought about that, just to make sure I remember.
I will say, by the way, I'm just curious, while you're looking, I'm going to ask the folks at home, have any of you been kicked off committees? Because I definitely have. And that was a learning lesson when I was, a young, sprightly little gentleman at UCLA being kicked off a committee for suggesting ideas that were, quote, too new and too innovative. But to be fair, that committee I was kicked off of, that project is still open. It's been open since 2007. Boom,
right.
Roasted.
That's right. That's right. I don't think committees are going away. I think they're so ingrained in the academic culture that we might as well just stop trying to fight them, and instead figure out a way to work within them. And a couple of things that I've done is, you have a committee, sure, but the committee has to meet when there's a concrete agenda. It has to be small enough that you can actually get everybody in the room, because that's a real great stall technique, is when the people that need to be there to make the decisions can just not show up, and then you've got to wait another month until you can talk about it again. I'm also a really big believer in putting together kind of an internal team that is staff to that committee, because I think I mentioned this already. Most committee members don't really want to do any work. They just want to hear what you have to say and decide whether they agree or not. So if you can come to them with a proposal instead of spending the time in the meeting talking about what you might do, you can usually move ahead more quickly. So I have always tried to say, hey, I'd like to have staff to this committee, so I'd like to put a small group of us together that are going to meet outside the committee structure, make recommendations, get stuff put together for you to review and approve, and that makes things move more quickly. So that's one idea. I do think committees are supposed to be for decision making, not for updating people. If you're getting people together in a room just to tell them what you've done since the last time you met, that's not an effective use. You should just send everyone an email. And so you should probably send everyone an email and then say, hey, but we are having this committee meeting, and these are the 3 things we're going to discuss and 3 things we're going to decide. So there's just a few thoughts.
Yeah, and the meetings thing is so true. I've been in so many meetings that are just so long and drawn out and nothing happens. I mean, it's just a basic thing. Anytime I call a meeting, you're going to know exactly how long the meeting is going to be before we start. We will never go longer, period. And I mean, I'm of an opinion that meetings should almost never be more than 30 to 45 minutes. And you have to have a clear, defined agenda before the meeting starts. Hey, we're all here today to do X, Y, and Z. At the end of the meeting, no one can leave it saying, here are the next steps as I understand them. Do we all agree this has been discussed? And then write it down and then follow it with an email. That's why project managers are great, because they can do that. But when they're not available, take down that role and be that yourself, because it's really important to, I found that it's important to track what happens in a meeting. And you can do that if immediately after the meeting you send an email saying, here's what's happened, and then it's kind of like, if you didn't agree with what happened in the meeting, raise your voice now. Otherwise, this is sort of the historical archive of what was discussed.
Right. Well, and I've done agendas where I've actually if you can tell after a few meetings who the people are that are going to try to derail the meeting and try to get you off track. So I'll go in with a written agenda and I'll put next to each topic item, 15 minutes. I mean, I've been known to put things like, this topic will be discussed from 10:05 to 10:12. And, you feel weird doing that, but I can't tell you how many people have said to me afterwards, I'm so glad you did that, because we just need to decide. We don't need to talk about this anymore. So techniques that you can do like that you feel perhaps uncomfortable about doing because you feel like a taskmaster and like you're really cutting off conversation, a lot of the people on the committee end up thanking you for.
Yeah, and otherwise, demand focus too. I'm sorry, I'm tired of cell phones and laptops in meetings when people are doing other things. You're going to get a lot more done if you focus on one thing at a time. And that's why one thing we've joked about, but I would love to see is there's a trend of standing meetings where you're not allowed to sit, because if you sit, then you get comfortable, then you're going to play on your phone, you want to hang out. But if you go into a conference room and you all stand around awkwardly, you're going to get things done really fast because you want to go back and sit down.
Now, I do think early in a project, the first meeting that you have, if you have a committee that you're working with, I think you should assume that the first meeting is one that you're not going to get anything done. The first meeting should be, let everybody say what they came to say, because a lot of times people are representing their office on a committee and they know that they have to have a certain point of view. And so that first meeting can be just them having a chance to say what they want to say. So the second meeting is when you can really start to say, all right, here's what we're going to do to be productive. And the first meeting is used to just get all that out there, get everybody, let everybody have a chance to say what they think.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. Really good advice. I think the committees thing is a dangerous one, but it's not going away. So when in doubt, learn how to manage it, because I don't think that's a something that's ingrained, definitely, I think, in the culture.
Right.
For better or for worse. So listen, Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
I really appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun.
It definitely was. It was great to have you on. I hope we can have you on again.
Sure, be happy to.
And for you folks watching at home, thank you guys for tuning in and being a part of Higher Ed Live as always. I'm coming to you back next week, same time, same place, with a big show. It's called Rethinking Social Media in Higher Ed. I'm going to have multiple guests, and I'm going to probably say some things that aren't going to make some people very happy, but it's a good thing. I'm tearing off a Band-Aid next week. I hope you guys can tune in. Really rethinking the role of social media in higher ed, because in some ways I think we've got it all wrong. And I'm going to talk about that. I hope you can join us to have that discussion. It's going to be a lot more in-depth than you think. Hopefully by the end of it, people won't be so mad at me. But at the end of the day, got to have some of those uncomfortable conversations just to push the needle and move things forward. So that's next Thursday. Have a couple blog posts in the queue going up at the beginning of next week as well. We also have admissions live. And as always, you can get updates on all of that and more over at higheredlive.com. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.